Hello and welcome to the Space Between Ideas. I'm Blaine Gates. Today is a very special day. It's day 73 and I only have like 8 minutes before the next meeting. Got a bunch of meetings today. I've already been in a bunch of meetings. It's a very busy Saturday. So let's get moving. Now, as you are well aware, we have gone to the end of the world and back. And now we are back in the state impact checklist. So we are evaluating courses of action. The last 10, 15 days has been about this idea of building scenarios. What does it mean to build scenarios? And as you listen, and as you have listened, the whole time I was like trying to figure it out myself. What does it mean to build scenarios? And so all right, let me just show it to you. So this is what it looks like. Like, how could I possibly talk about this in 8 minutes? It's just absolutely crazy. Let's go one by one. All right, so first we start with state impact. So we're talking about the state impact checklist. Now, earlier in the state impact checklist, we talked about framing the context. All right, framing the context of whatever problem you're trying to solve, whatever situation you're thinking about. The context is where the scenario is going to occur. So next you have build scenarios. Once you've framed the context of where these scenarios occur, now we need to start talking about the scenarios. Now, how do we talk about scenarios? All right, so you follow this build scenarios all the way down to here. Now this is supposed to be like a bracket, right? I don't know if you can see, there you go. So it's like a bracket, right? Now what is this section? Actually, it should start around here. Okay, so this is the state, no, it's not SS. This is the state progress checklist. Wait, where's my marker? All right, so this is the state progress checklist, all right? Now, in the state progress checklist, we have foster reuses, recognize outcomes, and perform actions. Now, why are these three so important, all right? So you have to know your goal. You have to know what you're working toward before you can really understand the scenarios that you want to build, all right? So when we talk about like where we're going, then you probably also want to think about like what is the teamwork that's involved with getting to those outcomes. All right. So now when you're talking about the outcomes in the teamwork, you can also identify the outcomes of the teams. When you're talking about reuses, you can also talk about reuses that people within teams would like. Okay, so now it's not just like when you're talking about teams, what are we talking about? So state synergy. State synergy tells you you have your producers, you have your peers or colleagues, and you have your customers, right? Those are the main. Then you have other synergies. All right, so when you get these four, it looks like three, when you have these four different types of synergies, these are four different categories you can use when you use an Excel spreadsheet to list all of your potential providers, all of your current colleagues, and maybe potential colleagues, and maybe competitors, and other people who work within your organization. Or you can talk about your customers, potential customers, former customers, and you can outline, and then other synergies, whatever those might be. And for each one of those, you can outline what are the outcomes that each of those different individuals or units or people are trying to reach. You can also talk about the reuses. After they achieve those outcomes, then what are they trying to reuse from successful experiences once they've achieved those outcomes? Now, in order to achieve those outcomes, of course, they have to perform certain actions. And when they're performing actions, then you need to identify within that group what are their entity personas, how do they support each other. So these are, what's an SO? Yeah, how do they, when they support each other through their efforts, what kind of actions do they perform? And then other actions, all right? So what are the roles within that group of people? Like, for example, if it's a customer, what are the different customer segments? Like, how do they use your product? How do they use your service? What are the different types of services that you're providing them? And then, like, how do you support each other when you're giving them your product or service? What do they have to do, and what do you have to do? And then, like, what are other actions that they are going to be doing once they have your product? What are they going to be doing on their own? And what are you doing to prepare them to use your products? Okay, so you can use these things to define the specific actions, the actions that need to be performed. All right, so once you have this like picture figured out, where are we going, right? So this is your whole your goal, your the results you're trying to achieve, where you're going. So you have to know where you're going before you start forming your scenarios. So down here, of course, we still have this bracket, right? Now within the bracket, in this area, we have choosing your plan, building scenarios, and you're making assumptions. So before we actually go in and build those scenarios, let's look at the bottom of the state progress checklist. So in the state progress checklist, you have 3 more things down here. Now this one's very special, all right? So the bottom one is called involve resources. Now, if you follow the line about involve resources, it actually goes all the way up and over and to the very end. All right, so when do you involve resources? So right now, we're talking about the state impact checklist. We're talking about building scenarios. And eventually, these are the other 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 themes of the state impact checklist. So these are the 7 things that we are going to do in order to analyze the scenarios. First, we have to make the scenarios, and then these are all the things that we're going to do to analyze the scenarios. Eventually, we will choose the plan. So you can see how this line actually goes up, over, and this is when we're going to analyze the scenarios. Eventually, we're going to choose the plan, and then we're what? We're going to perform the actions. Now, to perform the actions, we will need to involve the resources. But before we can involve the resources, we probably want to consider what resources we have to use right now. And some of the resources that we have, of course, are motivations. Now, when you are analyzing these different entities, companies, teamwork, people, all of these different things you put into your Excel spreadsheet, you can also analyze their motivation, their drive. So this is the state drive checklist. Now remember, we have recollecting, and we want people to increase their diligence. So we want them to be striving. All right? Now, as they strive, eventually they're going to start to what? They're going to start to enter this competing area. So in general, we want more diligence and we want more successfulness. Now, of course, there is that one part of the checklist where some people are able to use technology and train others, so they can move from a competing attitude to a coasting attitude, but still stay in a leading position. And in order to do that, they have to use processes. They have to follow a process. What's an S? Should be follow a process. They need to follow a process, and then they need to. What's an FA? I'm so confused. So, anyways, they need to create a process and follow a process. Eventually, they need to be able to achieve more outcomes with the same processes, and eventually, they can achieve those outcomes without needing or doing. All right. So you put all of those things together, and eventually, you are going to get to this area where you're going to start making some assumptions. No, you start to guide interactions. So guiding interactions, of course, is going to go back up to the Excel spreadsheet, which you've already created. But eventually, you're going to be making some assumptions. Now, when you make those assumptions, that's also part of this, the rest of the state impact checklist. So for the rest of the next week, we're going to talk about how to make these assumptions, how to go through each of these steps, through the scenarios that you're building, and then eventually you make a choice, and then you can involve those resources. Thank you for joining me for Space Between Ideas. I'm Blaine Gates.